Katherine Heigl spent years building a romantic comedy empire. Emmy winner at 28, star of the biggest comedy of 2007. Then, in 2008, she said one sentence about knocked up. Hollywood blacklisted her almost overnight. There were whispers about impossible demands, rumors about her mother taking over, accusations that she was ungrateful and impossible to work with. But what really happened in those 5 years when everything fell apart? And why did an actress who once commanded millions suddenly find herself begging for TV roles? The real story starts decades earlier than anyone expected. The childhood that changed everything. Katherine Heigl's story did not begin in Hollywood. It began in a busy family always trying to stay one step ahead. She was born Katherine Marie Heigl on November 24, 1978, in Washington, D.C., the youngest child of Nancy and Paul Heigl. Her mother worked in management. Her father worked in finance. The family kept moving through different places, Northern Virginia, then Denver, finally settling in New Canaan, Connecticut, when Katherine was 5. From the outside, it looked like a solid suburban life. But underneath, pressure was already building. Money was not always easy. 4 children meant constant responsibility. That pressure turned to tragedy on September 23, 1986. Katherine's older brother, Jason, was only 15 when he climbed into the back of a pickup truck with friends for a normal lunch outing. He was thrown from the truck and suffered a devastating brain injury. His body was still alive, but his brain was gone. For a week, Jason lay in intensive care on life support. Then the doctors gave the truth. They did not want to hear Jason was brain dead just 1 week before his 16th birthday. The family had to let him go. In the middle of that grief, another impossible choice arrived. Doctors told Nancy and Paul that Jason's organs could save other people. They had to make a decision no parent should ever have to make. They chose to say yes. Jason's eyes, heart, lungs, and other organs were given to strangers the family would never meet. Years later, Katherine spoke about that decision with pain but also meaning. The horror never left, yet the family held on to the idea that some other families got a second chance because of him. That search for meaning drew the family toward the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Its teachings about eternal families and life after death gave them something to hold on to when everything else felt random and cruel. Both parents converted, and Katherine was raised fully in that world. For her, that meant a childhood shaped by rules, restraint, and the belief that death was not the end. The modeling years and a split life. At the same time, another side of Katherine's life was quietly beginning. Her aunt sent photos to modeling agencies, hoping something might come from it. Soon, Katherine was signed by Wilhelmina, one of the biggest agencies. By the time she was still a child, she was already working in a world built on appearance and performance. She later described those early modeling years as brutal. She was expected to pose in ways that felt fake, smile on command, and repeat silly expressions while adults pushed her to seem older than she really was. The money was real, but childhood began slipping away under studio lights. That tension only grew because her home life and work life were pulling her in opposite directions. At home, Mormon values shaped what was acceptable rules about modesty and self-control. But, on camera, she was often asked to play girls who pushed limits. So, even as she grew more successful, she was learning to live 2 different lives at once. That split stayed with her and helps explain why her relationship with Hollywood would always be uneasy. She could succeed there, but she was never fully at peace. By her early teens, work had become serious. Katherine started booking major catalog jobs for Sears and Lord & Taylor. She was earning real money at an age when most children were just thinking about school and friends. Her mother, Nancy, stepped away from her own work and became Katherine's full-time manager. From that point on, the bond between them became one of the defining forces in her life. Nancy was not simply a mother helping a child actor. She was deeply involved in every step, protective, outspoken, and willing to fight for her daughter. Over time, that helped build Katherine's reputation for being demanding, even when the lines between Katherine's voice and her mother's influence were not always clear. Roswell, Grey's Anatomy, and the rise to fame. Modeling gave way to acting. At 14, she made her film debut in That Night. More roles followed, including My Father, the hero, a film that now feels uncomfortable to look back on because of how young she was and how adult the material seemed. Then came Roswell and the first strong wave of real fame. She played Isabel Evans, an alien-human hybrid, and the role gave her a devoted fan base. The show ran for 3 seasons and turned her from a former child model into a television star. But Grey's Anatomy changed everything. In 2005, Heigl was cast as Dr. Izzy Stevens. At first, she was not the biggest name in the room. That changed quickly. Audiences connected with Izzy's warmth, idealism, and vulnerability. The Denny Duquette storyline, Izzy's desperate love for a dying patient, gave Heigl material full of grief, panic, and heartbreak. When Denny died, audiences felt it, and so did the industry. In 2007, Heigl won the Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress. Then came the movies. Knocked Up turned her into a full-blown film star. 27 Dresses confirmed her as one of the faces of romantic comedy. Magazine covers, red carpets, major interviews, and big paychecks all arrived in a rush. For a moment, she looked untouchable. The cracks began to show. But even in that success, trouble was already forming. On the Grey's set, tensions were not far from the surface. During the Isaiah Washington scandal, when he used a homophobic slur about T.R. Knight, Heigl spoke out forcefully and publicly. She defended her friend. In that moment, many saw her as brave. Yet, that same bluntness would later be used against her. Around the same time, Heigl learned that some co-stars had received pay raises while she had not. She pushed back. She negotiated harder. She made it known that she believed her value should be recognized. In Hollywood, women who push in public are often described very differently than men who do the same thing. The word difficult had started floating around her name. The Knocked Up interview that broke everything. The first major crack came when she spoke openly about Knocked Up in a Vanity Fair interview. She said the film felt a little sexist to her. She explained that the women came off as uptight, while the men were allowed to be goofy and lovable. It was an honest opinion. And just this year, with the rise of the Jung Hall reclaimed the rom-com movement and critical reassessments of 2000s comedies, many have argued she was right. But timing matters in Hollywood. She said it while still riding the success of the movie. Judd Apatow and Seth Rogen felt stung. Rogen later admitted he felt betrayed. From his point of view, the experience on set had felt loose, collaborative, and full of chemistry. He thought they might keep working together for years. So when Heigl's comments came out, it felt less like criticism and more like rejection. Apatow waited for an apology that never came. Heigl would later admit she should have reached out directly, but by then the silence had already done its damage. The Apatow circle was one of the strongest forces in studio comedy. When Heigl fell out of that world, she lost access to a whole creative lane that might have carried her for years. The Emmy withdrawal that made everything worse. Soon after, she made another decision that deepened the fallout. In 2008, after having won an Emmy the year before, she withdrew herself from Emmy consideration for Grey's Anatomy, saying she did not feel she had been given material strong enough to deserve a nomination. What she may have meant as a defense of standards landed instead as a public insult to the show's writing team. Shonda Rhimes took it personally. The writers took it personally. Later, Heigl admitted she handled it badly and should have dealt with it privately, but by then, the damage was done. The moment stuck. A woman who had recently been praised for her talent was suddenly being framed as ungrateful, difficult, and impossible to please. Rumors spread. Some were grounded in real tension. Others grew as stories tend to grow. Once the industry decides someone is a problem, Hollywood can be ruthless when it senses weakness. Once that label attached itself to Heigl, it followed her everywhere. The mother factor and the salary demands. As all this unfolded, another force was shaping her image behind the scenes. Her mother, Nancy, who also acted as her manager, became part of the problem in the eyes of many insiders. Instead of softening tense situations, she was often described as making them worse. Producers and executives started talking about the two of them as a package deal, and not in a good way. Nancy was said to be demanding, combative, and involved in everything from scheduling to script concerns. Even if some stories were exaggerated, they added fuel to the image that Heigl was simply too hard to deal with. At the same time, her salary demands started becoming part of the conversation. After several successful films, she was asking for major star money, reportedly $12 million per picture. On one level, that made sense. She had delivered hits. But timing matters. She was trying to make that leap just as her reputation was turning sour. So instead of being seen as confident, she was seen as unrealistic. Producers began deciding that, even when she fit a role, she was not worth the trouble. The relationship with Grey's Anatomy falls apart. Her relationship with Grey's Anatomy was falling apart. The Emmy withdrawal had bruised the writers. There were public comments about long shooting days. There were private tensions about her growing movie career. Heigl wanted more room to pursue film work and more balance. Shonda Rhimes was building one of television's biggest dramas and did not want to bend around one actor's frustration. Eventually, Heigl left the show earlier than expected. The trust had broken. The films that failed. By then, the damage to her career was showing up in the work. She still landed movies, but the shine was fading. The Ugly Truth made money, which helped for a moment, but it did not fully reset her image. Then came Killers, which underperformed and got torn apart by critics. Life as We Know It did better with audiences than reviewers, but still did not restore her standing. And then, One for the Money hit even harder. That one was supposed to open the door to a franchise based on Janet Ivanovich's best-selling novels. Instead, it collapsed. The box office disappointed. Critics hated it. Sequel hopes disappeared overnight. These were not just isolated flops. They arrived at the worst possible time. If she had still been seen as easy to work with, some of those failures might have been treated as normal bumps in a career. Plenty of actors survive bad films. But when someone already has a reputation problem, every weak opening becomes proof. Every underperforming film becomes a warning sign. Studios stopped seeing risk balanced by reward. They just saw risk. The quiet blacklist and the TV comeback that failed. What followed was not a dramatic public banishment. It was quieter than that, and in some ways even colder. Offers dried up. Romantic comedy roles became rarer. Producers stopped pushing for her. The same actress who once looked like a clear studio favorite now had to fight for relevance. She later said it felt like the career that had once supported her suddenly turned on her. The TV comeback attempts did not solve the problem. State of Affairs arrived with decent attention and then lost viewers. Doubt barely had time to breathe before it was pulled. These shows were supposed to help reposition her. Instead, they seemed to confirm that her name alone could no longer carry a project. In 2024, she starred in the Netflix rom.com Our Little Secret, which became a modest holiday hit but failed to generate the kind of buzz that leads to a true comeback. Industry watchers noted that while the film performed decently for streaming, no major studio rushed to sign her for a theatrical release. The emotional toll and where she stands now. The emotional toll was severe. Heigl spoke openly about anxiety, therapy, and the way public shaming got inside her head. She described the feeling of being picked apart and reduced to the worst version of herself. In a candid 2025 interview, she said, "I was called difficult for years, and I believed it. I thought something was wrong with me." She kept apologizing, trying to fix what had happened. But even those apologies seemed to backfire. The more she explained herself, the weaker she looked to people who had already made up their minds. As of 2026, Katherine Heigl is 47 years old. She lives on a Utah ranch with her husband, singer Josh Kelly, and their 3 children, 2 adopted from South Korea, a choice that echoes her own family's adoption of her older sister Meg, and 1 biological. She works occasionally, taking smaller television roles and the occasional streaming film, but the major studio comedies, the $12 million paychecks, the magazine covers, those are gone. She has said she is at peace with that, but peace and blacklisting are not the same thing. Her story has found new resonance in recent months. In March 2026, a viral TikTok series titled The Heigl Effect amassed over 50 million views, with Gen Z creators arguing that Heigl was ahead of her time and was cancelled simply for telling the truth about Hollywood's sexism. The hashtag #JusticeForKatherine trended for several days. Film critic Mark Harris wrote in The Atlantic that Heigl's downfall looks less like a cautionary tale and more like a premonition of Jinghal Me Too-era accountability. Meanwhile, Shonda Rhimes, now at Netflix with her massive production deal, was asked about Heigl in a recent interview and simply said, "I wish her well," a diplomatic silence that speaks volumes. The industry has never formally apologized to Heigl. No executive has called to say they were wrong. But the conversation has shifted. In 2026, the same bluntness that cost her everything is being reassessed as courage. That does not get her back in a major movie. But it does something else. It rewrites the story. And for Katherine Heigl, who has spent nearly 2 decades watching that story be told without her, that may be the only justice she ever gets.